Hi, my name is Tuti Sarya, and I graduated from NYU this year, and I'm at Stanford for my PhD now. And I'm going to be talking about my thesis, which is about dynamic models of photovoltaic system installations and upgrades. So basically, solar panels and how sort of agents make decisions about um, installing and then later on upgrading these systems. So just the motivation behind my project was that there's a lot of literature about solar energy adoption, just like generally in the renewable energy literature. But most of it just treats solar energy as a terminal action. So they say that once you install a solar panel, that's it. Like you cannot really like expand it or upgrade to a newer panel. And there's a lot of research on it. Especially a lot of this literature has been used to inform policy decisions relating to subsidies, tax benefits, government incentives, that kind of stuff. And I'm trying to see if the real world counter that there is really an option to upgrade leads to any sorts of problems with those incentives. So yeah, in the real world, we do see an option to upgrade because agents anytime can just upgrade to a newer panel. They can stop using their old panel, and this essentially like creates a stopping problem where a lot of the models that we see don't really account for a expansion decision. So yeah, I just want to see how that changes estimates of parameters, installation rates, effects of incentives, and how that changes the probability of agents upgrading their existing photovoltaic systems. So I'm actually going to estimate all of these, and I'll describe the model in a few slides. But just talking about literature, there's a lot of intertemporal literature in the renewable energy field just because there's like a clear trade-off. So your decision tomorrow is going to be based off of what your benefits are in that period, which really depend on what kind of decisions you made today. So De Groot and Verboven, this is one of the like big solar panel papers. They account for this intertemporal nature and create a dynamic discrete choice model. What they find is that consumers are like excessively discounting the future, so it's better to give them upfront subsidies rather than production-based ones in order to just like increase the share of solar in the country. Langer and Lamois's dynamic decision choice model again, they study what kind of subsidy path would be the best, and they focus only on data from California. And their results were that the subsidy should increase over time so that initially when you're offering a lower subsidy, you're not really over subsidizing agents in terms of offering a really high subsidy to people who would have just adopted solar panels at a very low subsidy or no subsidy at all. So I just this is the existing literature. There is definitely a gap that there is no possibility of upgrades in this, whereas in the real world, about like 3% of installations are upgrades of existing models. Um, so yeah, I definitely want to look at questions such as if agents know that they can expand their systems in the future, will they still prefer upfront subsidies to production-based ones? Like, how does that change things? So my data comes from Lawrence Berkeley Labs Tracking the Sun report. It includes more than 2 million solar panel installations. So it's very comprehensive. It basically like tracks every solar panel installation in the country, I think, because these are sourced from the producers and not the consumers. And I focus on county level solar panel installations from 4 states, which are California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Minnesota. And I focus only on non-third party owned residential solar systems. So these are the systems that the owners or the agents are actually making decisions about, and it's not like a Con Ed lease or something. And I focus, my time period is between 2007 and 2021. Um, okay, so just to like give a sense of how things have been, how the trends look for this market over time. These are just the number of upgrades relative to the market size over the like past decade, a little over that. And we can see that there's like an exponential growth for California, especially just because of their amazing incentive programs. And there's been a general upward trend. Minnesota saw like no upgrades, so that's kind of a bit of an outlier. But in the rest of the states, there's like a general upward trend. And looking at investment and upgrades, like the total number of US dollars in millions invested in solar panel upgrades only, and this does not account for like initial or new installations. So just in upgrades, we can also see that there is a countrywide almost exponential trend, especially in recent years. They've just like taken off. So coming to my model, I define a few variables in order to account for factors such as system efficiency and stuff like that. So I define the incident energy variable for every county, which is just the mean size of the solar panel that I observe in the base year divided by the system efficiency eta. And I create the effective size as just the system efficiency for every year times the baseline incident energy, which is just calculated at the base, at the first observed year or the base year for the county. And this allows me to account for sort of changes in system efficiency, which is really important because it's been just, that's also been increasing over time. And I then create the net present value variable, which accounts for a bunch of things. So all the improvements in system efficiency are accounted by the effective size. I account for installation costs net of incentives, so all upfront subsidies are deducted from that. I account for tax benefits, which is the investment tax credit that gives like a 20-ish% rebate on your tax return every year. I account for electricity savings from net metering, so you can just sort of essentially sell that energy back to the government. And in my data, I observe the following relationship between the net present value variable and the probability of installation for every county. And this is just a weighted average by the number of installations in that county. So we see that there's a positive trend, which makes a lot of sense because if you're getting like higher returns, you would want to install more. So the probability goes up over there. And talking about upgrades, this is the trend that I see on average between net present value and the probability of upgrades. But this is sort of like a little bit biased because if I only look at like recent years, I see a very heavily upward trend versus upgrades weren't really a thing back in like the 2010s, or like solar energy generally wasn't that big. So I see a little bit of a negative or a flat slope in those years, so the overall relationship turns out to be negative. And just describing my model, so I create two models. The first one is just when installation is a terminal action. So this replicates the existing literature. There is no sort of option to upgrade to a newer panel. And then I create another model in which there is actually that option, and I sort of compare the findings from both. So I define the profit function as just A plus B times the NPV if agents do decide to install the panel and zero otherwise. So A sort of captures a disutility, or we can call them the psychic non-monetary costs that agents face when they install a solar panel. So that could be in the form of like an uglier roof, or they just like the hassle of like maintaining a solar panel, stuff like that. And then I define the per period utility using epsilon, which is just a logit shock of installing or not installing. I define a choice specific value function. So this takes the form of a Bellman equation-ish, which I'm going to describe in the next slide. But this is the choice-specific value function that you get in each period, depending on your decision in that period. I add a so the Euler's gamma comes from integrating the utility over epsilon, and that's just a positive like logit shock. So just to make sure that people don't decide to just wait every year just to like harvest this positive shock, I add a discounted stream of that positive shock to the case that people do install a solar panels. So that sort of equalizes that incentive to just wait every year and harvest that shock. And the optimal stopping problem is just you try to maximize the sum of your expected discounted value of your future utilities, given the state variable, which is just the net present value in that year. And this can just be reformulated as a Bellman equation, which is your utility plus the discount factor times the ex ante utility function, takes the which takes the log x form coming from the logit model. So this is what I have. And then for the last period, capital T, this is my utility, this is my value function, and I just assume that since this is a perfect four-side infinite horizon problem, I assume that the last period is the most optimal and that it keeps repeating forever. So in the last period, you get the NPV from the last period, and you get the ex ante value from that period, not the next period. So how I solve this equation is I use Bellman updating on the last period t to solve the function for that period, and then I just iterate backwards to get to a, like get the value function for every period. And just by using the logit model, I have a prediction for the probability that in year t, a solar panel is installed. So that's just given by this formula right here. And I then do like a basic like maximum likelihood estimation to estimate my parameters, so A and B, and I start my initial guess with the static estimates just based off of a simple regression, only using 2021 data, because that would be like the capital T period that we're talking about. So just the optimum period that repeats forever. And I maximize the log likelihood of observing the predicted probabilities for each county. And then I sum that over the counties and I maximize the total likelihood. So it's just a binomial distribution of NT and capital NT and small NT, where NT is like the owner occupied households and small n are the new installations that I observe in the data. The probability PR tilde is just what I estimated from the Logit model in the last slide. So yeah, this gives me like an estimate for A and B, which is dynamic. And then I do the same sort of thing for my second model, where now there is an upgrade decision. I define Y as the first year for each county that I observe any expansions in. And I just so this is the decision space for every year T. I assume that you have a vintage I, and in year T you can either install the new vintage I, or you can keep your existing vintage. So this effectively gives us two categories of agents, which are people who have no solar energy and they upgrade to just the vintage T. So that's just equivalent to installing solar energy for the first time. And the second category is the people who have solar system vintage I, and they have the option to upgrade to either the current vintage, which is T, or they can just continue to keep their vintage I. I also assume that to begin with, everyone starts with a Y-1 vintage, which I impose has 0 era, so it has like 0 net present value. So that's equivalent to like starting with no solar panels. So all the agents in the economy start with no solar panels, and then in the first year, upgrading is equivalent to installing. And that's the decision space. I again define a profit function for each period when you do install a solar panel. It results in the same net present value that a new installation would have. So that's a big assumption, and you essentially just replace your stream of electricity savings with those of the new vintage T, and you still have to pay the installation costs associated with T. So you don't pay the installation costs for I twice. And then so A again is just the psychic or disutility psychic costs of installing the panel. B is the return on NPV. M here is the maintenance cost that you sort of pay, that you've been paying on your vintage I that you have. So it's 0 if you like don't have a panel. So it's 0 for the Y-1 vintage. And again, I defined the per period utility using epsilon, which is a logit shock type 1. I have my choice specific value function for every year T, where agents have vintage I, given my parameter space. This is the choice specific value function. And then the optimal stopping problem can just be the maximum expected discounted value of the utilities given the decision parameters NPVT, NPVI, and the installation costs. I reformulated as a Bellman equation, which is the maximum of the utility plus the discounted ex ante value, where this just again takes the takes the log x form because of the um, logit model. And then I assume that the t plus one, capital T plus one, is the optimal period that keeps repeating forever because I essentially want to impose the assumption that capital T vintage is the optimal vintage. So in capital T plus one period, your only option is to either upgrade to a capital T vintage or keep your existing vintage. So you either upgrade to the most optimal vintage or you don't. So whatever returns you get are the T vintage returns. Um, yeah, and the model, once again, it just predicts the probability of upgrading in year T given that you have a vintage I. So this is just conditional probability, and I can just find out the marginals by like summing over the share of agents that actually have vintage I. And my estimation, once again, I use static data for an initial guess. So, and again, I estimate the log likelihood of observing the predicted probabilities given my initial installations for each county, and then I sum over counties and I maximize the total likelihood. So over here, as you can see, I have sort of two different products over here. So the first one only accounts for the initial installations, which effectively in 2007 are just upgrades. And then the second product over here, this accounts for upgrades. So n prime is the installed base, and then from that installed base, ut upgrades happen, and the probability of those upgrades is just qt. And yeah, similarly, capital N are the owner occupied households, small n are the new installations. PR tilde is just the probability of a new installation. So the sum of these two, the product of these two, gives me a likelihood of all of these happening at the same time. And here are my parameter estimates from the two models. So in the terminal action model, I observe a disutility of a positive disutility. So that actually turns out to be a installation benefit. I observe a small positive elasticity to net present value. The implied installation benefit is just given by the ratio of these two, which is in US dollars estimated around 37 million. In the second model that had the option to upgrade, I observe a valid disutility, a small negative number. The NPV effect is similar-ish. It's a small positive number. The maintenance cost is negative $0.7. And the implied installation cost, the ratio of A and B is like negative about $1 million. So just talking about conclusions and policy estimate and policy implications. I observe an elasticity to net present value returns in both models. So I see a very small number for B, which is a little bit counterintuitive in the sense that why are people responding very little to like all of these subsidies and electricity savings, because NPV accounts for a lot of incentives and stuff like that. So It's counterintuitive, but it's consistent across both models, which tells me that modeling choices actually lead to no differences in the impact of policies that shift only the NPV. So any policy that changes, let's say, upfront incentives, like the implication of that policy doesn't really change with using a terminal action model or an upgrades model. But what is really interesting is that I observe an installation cost in my upgrades model, which is totally valid, but I observe an installation benefit in my terminal action model, which actually tells me that there might be some bias from ignoring the possibility of upgrades, because essentially the psychic and non-monetary costs are being ignored, um, and that policies that compensate for, let's say, disutility, or policies that account for the switching cost from um, non-renewable to renewable energy, like those policies, the implications of those policies and how they've been motivated, there might be some issues with that. I also just see very large magnitudes of installation costs and benefit, but again, these are consistent across both models. So modeling choices don't really have anything to do with that. So the main focus was just that the parameters were biased from ignoring the possibilities. Um, and um, yeah, the results aren't really that interesting, but it's interesting to note that there was no difference from NPV returns, and that there might be a potential bias from ignoring the possibility of upgrades. And that is the end of it. Thank you. And I welcome any questions, comments, feedback.